Welcome to the deep dive. Today, you're joining us as we journey back, way back, to the Late Cretaceous.
That's right. We're exploring a really fascinating armored dinosaur called Ahshislepelta.
Yeah, Ahshislepelta. We've got the scientific papers, the ones that first described it, gave it its name, and, well, later research, too. Stuff that tries to figure out exactly where it fits in the big dinosaur picture.
Exactly. And our mission, you could say, is to unpack what makes this particular dinosaur tick, what's unique about it, and, what does its existence actually tell us about that ancient world?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How do paleontologists take just like bits of bone, millions of years old, and build a whole picture?
It's detective work, really.
Totally. So get ready because we're diving into a real paleontological puzzle with Ahshislepelta.
And what's so interesting right from the get-go is how even these, fragments, these fossil bits, can paint such a detailed picture, but also, as we'll see, spark a whole lot of scientific debate.
Right.
We're looking at clues from, what, about 74.5 million years ago, trying to piece together a story.
Okay, let's start the detective work. The name Ahshislepelta. It sounds significant, like it has a story.
It definitely does. So the first part, Ahshislepelta, it points right to where the fossils were found. The Ahshislepa Wash Shield, which is inside the Ahshislepa Wilderness Study Area. That's in New Mexico.
Okay, so named after the place. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's pretty common in paleontology, like leaving a little geographic marker.
And the second part, minor. That sounds like it means small.
Exactly. The species name, minor, it was chosen because, well, the evidence suggests that this dinosaur was actually kind of small, especially compared to other North American ankylosaurids they knew about back then.
So like a compact model?
Kind of, yeah. Maybe a bit smaller within its group.
Okay, so what did they actually find? You said fragments, not a whole skeleton. What pieces are we working with?
Right, no complete skeleton. The main specimen, the holotype, is SMP VP 1930, and it's what we call postcranial. So everything behind the skull.
Yeah.
The bits they found include parts of the hip area, the pelvic girdle, a partial scapulocoracoid, that's the shoulder blade fused with another bone, the coracoid, part of the upper arm, the proximal radius, that's the top bit of one of the forearm bones, lots of broken bits of vertebrae from the neck and back,
Right.
and importantly, armor plates. The osteoderms, some whole, some broken, mostly from the chest area, the thorax, plus other little bits they couldn't quite identify.
Wow, that sounds like quite the jigsaw puzzle, but still a decent amount to go on.
It is, yeah, but definitely like assembling something complex with missing instructions, like you said.
So when did this all happen? When was this discovery made, and who gets the credit?
Well, the first find was back in 2005 in the Kirtland Formation, specifically the Hunter Wash member. But digging it all out carefully, collecting all those pieces, that took several field seasons.
Oh, right, not a quick job.
No, definitely not. It stretched from 2005 all the way to 2009. And then the formal description, giving it the name Ahshislepelta minor, that was published in 2011 by Michael Burns and Robert M. Sullivan.
And where are these important bones kept now for scientists to study?
They're housed at the State Museum of Pennsylvania over in Harrisburg.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really crucial for these key specimens, these holotypes, to be kept safe and accessible for researchers everywhere.
Right. Let's try and picture this dinosaur. We know it was relatively small, minor. How does it stack up against similar dinos based on the bones they found?
Okay, so if you look at the humerus, the upper arm bone, its length suggests Ahshislepelta was bigger than, say, Pinacosaurus mephistocephalus, but smaller than Talururus, another species, Pinacosaurus grangerae. But here's a little twist.
Oh.
Its scapulocoracoid, that shoulder structure we mentioned, that was actually larger than the one in Talururus.
Huh. Interesting. So not all parts scaled the same way.
Exactly. It's a great reminder that evolution isn't always just simple scaling up or down. Different bits can evolve at different speeds, responding to different needs.
Good point. Now, the paper mentioned they think the specimen found was probably an adult or nearly adult. How did they figure that out?
Well, there are a few clues in the bones themselves. The scapula and coracoid, the shoulder bones, were totally fused together. That usually happens when they're mature. Same with the vertebrae. The main body and the arch part were fused. And the osteoderms, the armor plates, their bony cores showed signs of remodeling, sort of like bone getting reshaped as the animal gets older.
Right, makes sense.
So putting those clues together, it strongly suggests we're looking at an animal that was pretty much full-grown, or very close to it. So the size we see is likely representative of the adult size.
So what really made Ahshislepelta stand out? What features screamed new species?
Well, the original description, back in 2011, really honed in on one specific thing about the shoulder blade. It's called the dorsolateral overhang of the acromion process.
Okay, that's a mouthful. What does it mean?
Yeah. Basically, think of the shoulder blade having a bony ridge or projection on its side, the acromion. In Ahshislepelta, this stuck out sideways quite a bit, about 25% a quarter of the total top-to-bottom width of the bone right there.
Ah, I see.
And that particular proportion, that specific overhang, seemed unique compared to other known ankylosaurs at the time. That was the key diagnostic feature they identified.
Were there other distinctive things, maybe about the bones or the armor texture?
Yes, actually, the surface texture of the osteoderms, the armor, it was described as having this uniformly rough, pitted texture, but with not many grooves for blood vessels and nerves running across the surface. Kind of like another ankylosaurid, Euoplocephalus. And the little holes where those vessels did go in, the neurovascular foramina, they tended to go straight down into the bone, or maybe at a slight angle, not spread out in a network like some others.
Okay, interesting detail. Let's zoom in on some bones, the scapula, the shoulder blade. What else can we learn from that?
So as we said, it was fused to the coracoid typical adult ankylosaur feature. It had this blunt, kind of roughened area up near the front edge, probably where some hefty muscles attached for moving the arm.
Right. Powerful shoulders.
Seems like it. And interestingly, unlike nodosaurids, that's the other main group of armored dinosaurs, the top edge of the scapula didn't really get narrower. And that acromion ridge we talked about, it extended forward to about the same level as the front of the shoulder socket, the glenoid.
And the arm itself, they found a good chunk of the left arm, right?
They did, yeah. More than half complete, actually. The humerus, the upper arm bone, was about 31 centimeters long.
Okay.
And it had this really prominent ridge running down at the delta pectoral crest. That's where big muscles like the deltoid and pectorals attach.
For strength, I imagine.
Absolutely. It's pretty wide, about 15 centimeters, and angled out at 23 degrees. Suggests a really robust, powerful forelimb. Then the radius, one of the forearm bones, was about 8 centimeters long, with an oval spot where it joined the humerus.
What about the backbone pieces, the vertebrae? What could they tell from those fragments?
Well, they couldn't pin them down exactly, but they likely came from the neck or the back. Some of the back ones seemed quite tall, and the hole for the spinal cord, the neural canal, was sort of squashed side to side. And importantly, none of them showed any signs of the bony arches not being fully fused to the main body. Again, pointing towards a mature animal.
And the armor. Can't forget the armor. What kinds of osteoderms did they find?
Right. Most seemed to be from the chest area, the thorax, though some might have been from the hips or maybe even the legs. They weren't all the same shape. Some were keeled, meaning they had a ridge running down the middle. Others were more circular, kind of like a low cone, but with the peak slightly off-center.
Okay.
And they found something cool in the right shoulder blade, and another spot, these arrangements of small bony bumps, ossicles, sort of clustered around the bigger osteoderms, like little rosettes.
Neat. You mentioned one particularly large osteoderm.
Yeah, the biggest one they found was probably from the middle of the back, maybe just behind the neck area. It was pretty hefty, 15 centimeters long, 12 wide, 10 high.
Wow.
And it looked a bit like some of the big plates found on Scolosaurus, another ankylosaurid. But then they also found tiny ones, little ossicles, only a centimeter across. Shows the variety.
It really does.
And yeah, that surface texture we talked about, smooth to pitted, not many grooves, like Euoplocephalus. And when they looked closely at the structure of one osteoderm, microscopically, it showed features typical of ankylosaurids.
This detailed look is great, really helps picture it. But it sounds like figuring out where Ahshislepelta fits on the dinosaur family tree, that's been tricky.
That's a really, really crucial point. So Burns and Sullivan, who first described it, they suggested it was an ankylosaurid, specifically in the Ankylosaurinae subfamily, the group with ankylosaurs itself, ones usually with tail clubs. But, and this is important, that suggestion wasn't based on what we call a phylogenetic analysis, a detailed computer-aided study comparing lots of anatomical features across many species to work out relationships.
Okay, so it was more of an initial assessment.
Exactly. And later studies, ones that did use those more rigorous cladistic methods, or they came up with different answers.
Okay, so what did they propose? Where did they put it?
Well, it's been a bit of a journey. In 2015, Arbor and Curry suggested it was a close relative, a sister taxon, to another one called Gastonia. And they placed it near the base, kind of an early branch, within the Ankylosauridae family.
Okay, so still an ankylosaurid, but maybe an early type.
Sort of, yeah. But then, in 2018, a study by Wiersma and Ermis put in something called a polynomy,
Polygamy.
Yeah, it basically means the analysis couldn't clearly resolve the exact branching order. So Ahshislepelta ended up in this unresolved group alongside several other well-known ankylosaurids like Euplocephalus, Scalosaurus, and even Ankylosaurus.
So like a shrub instead of a clear tree branch?
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, the relationships between those specific ones were uncertain in that analysis.
Okay, that covers the ankylosaurid side, but didn't you also mention some studies linking it to the other group, the Nodosauridae?
Exactly. This is where it gets really interesting. Several analyses have actually pointed towards it being a nodosaurid, or at least closely related to them.
Wow, okay, so completely different major group.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
For instance, Arbor and colleagues in 2016 found Ahshislepelta also in a polygamy, but this time with Neobrosaurus, which is a known nodosaurid, and another young nodosaurid specimen.
Hmm.
Then another study in 2018 by Zhang and colleagues also put it in a polygamy, again with several nodosaurids, like Tankocephalus, Sylvosaurus, and Neobrosaurus again, plus Nodosaurus itself.
So multiple studies grouping it with nodosaurids in these unresolved spots.
Right. And then also in 2018, Rivera Silva and their team proposed something more specific, that Ahshislepelta was the direct sister taxon, the closest relative, specifically to Neobrosaurus.
Man, it's fascinating. You have the same fossils, but analyses pointing in such different directions. Ankylosauridae, Nodosauridae. What does that tell us?
It tells us a lot about the challenges, honestly. We're working with incomplete skeletons, right? Different researchers might coded characters slightly differently or use different data sets or different analytical software.
And get different results.
You get different results. It really highlights that figuring out evolutionary history isn't always straightforward. It's a process, constantly being refined as we find more fossils or develop new ways to analyze the data we have. This is science in action, really.
Definitely. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the world Ahshislepelta lived in. What was its environment like?
So we know the time period, late Campanian stage, late Cretaceous, about 74.5 million years ago. And the location, as we said, was the Hunter Wash member of the Kirtland Formation in New Mexico.
And what are those rocks like? What do they tell us about the habitat?
Geologically, the Kirtland Formation is a mix. You've got sandstone, siltstone, mudstone, even some coal and shale layers. This whole area was on the western edge of that huge inland sea, the Western Interior Seaway, that cut North America in half back then. So Ahshislepelta was living on a coastal plain, probably a floodplain environment with rivers and streams.
So potentially wet, maybe swampy in places because of the coal?
Yeah, the coal suggests swampy areas sometimes, but the mix of other sediments indicates it wasn't all swamp. There were likely drier areas too.
And plants, what was growing there? What would Ahshislepelta have been eating?
Fossil plants show it was pretty lush, lots of ferns, conifers, and also flowering plants, angiosperms.
Oh, okay.
The types of fossil leaves they find, often with smooth edges and things called drip tips, which help shed water, suggest the climate was probably warm temperate, maybe even subtropical.
Sounds quite different from New Mexico today.
Oh, absolutely. And interestingly, compared to the slightly older rocks underneath the Fruitland Formation, this part of the Kirtland seems to have been a bit better drained, fewer widespread coal swamps.
So who else was living there? Did Ahshislepelta have neighbors? Other dinosaurs?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It was part of a really diverse ecosystem. You had Stegosaurus, one of those dome-headed Paleontolosaurs.
Right.
Two different horned dinosaurs, ceratopsids called Novoceratops, and Terminocavus. Another ankylosaur, actually an ankylosaurian ankylosaurid, named Zeopelta.
So another armored dinosaur nearby.
Yep, and then the big predator of the area was likely Pisiherbicur, a large tyrannosauroid.
Ah, the local T-Rex cousin.
Pretty much. And flying overhead, you might have seen Navahodactylus, which was an Asdarchid pterosaur, one of those big flying reptiles.
Wow, quite the community.
It really was a dynamic late Cretaceous world.
Okay, so let's bring this deep dive together. What are the main things we should really remember about Ahshislepelta?
Well, I think the key things are, it was a relatively small armored dinosaur, lived in late Cretaceous New Mexico about 74.5 million years ago. We know it from a partial skeleton, but one that shows some unique features, especially in the shoulder and the armor texture. These features give us valuable clues about ankylosaur evolution. But, and this is a big but, its exact spot on the family tree is still very much debated. Is it an early ankylosaurid? Is it actually a nodosaurid? The jury's still out.
The classification confusion.
Exactly. And finally, knowing it lived in that Kirtland floodplain environment alongside all those other dinosaurs helps us build a much richer picture of life just before the end of the dinosaur era.
So, thinking about that ongoing debate, ankylosaurid versus nodosaurid, What does that uncertainty really tell you, our listener, about how evolution works? And maybe about how paleontologists have to piece things together from, well, often not much evidence.
It's a great question to ponder. It shows evolution isn't always neat lines, and that interpreting the past involves detective work, debate, and constantly reevaluating as new clues emerge.
Yeah. It makes you wonder what discovery might be out there, maybe still buried in New Mexico, that could finally settle where Ahshislepelta belongs. What bone, what feature might be the key.
That's exactly. What piece might finally solve this particular prehistoric family puzzle? Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.